Hi, everybody. This is Emily. Thanks for joining me in this video podcast. I'm going to talk to you today about working on your novel, writing fiction, the inclusion of applying misery to your fiction writing. Now, this sounds a little bit dark and dreary, but bear with me while I get into talking about this a little bit. And so if you're new to my channel, I do put videos on here regularly. Most of them are me live videos, but sometimes I do these video podcasts when I'm not in a place where I can film, bringing you content on how you can improve and evolve your writing skills to become a professional career fiction author and prepare your books for publication. Okay, let's talk about applying misery to fiction writing. So, writing fiction is an evolving form of art, right? The most successful writers have learned that conflict should just drip buckets off of most of the pages in your book. Where conflict manifests in different forms, it's the most memorable and effective when it's influenced by character and situational misery. Integrating suffering into a manuscript is just one way to create conflict, yet it's often overlooked by novice writers. Oftentimes, new writers are afraid to inject too much drama into a story due to fear of painting too negative a picture. I teach my students that this isn't necessarily the case. Even in books that are not R-rated, if you write sweet romance, if you write historical fiction, you can still have characters who are suffering. It doesn't have to be misery, brutal, macabre type misery. So bear with me a little longer here. It's really misery that keeps readers hooked. The payoff of using this technique is monumental, and it will enthrall readers so that they become absorbed in the book's emotional chaos and unable to set it down. We've all been there, right? We're sitting here, we're working on our books, and suddenly we hear a siren outside our home office bedroom window and going down our street, and it stops across the street, and everyone in your house, including yourself, drops what they're doing, pops out of the chair, and goes and sort of sticks our nose into the blinds to see what's going on, or we pull up and open the window to hear what's going on. We want to know. We are naturally drawn to the details of human suffering. And this actually particularly happened to me, ironically, in my home office where I am now, a couple years ago. It was in the spring. My window was wide open, and my house is on a corner, and directly across the street from my house is on a corner, right? So the front faces one street, and then the street that's on the other corner, is on the side where my office was. And across the street, directly from my side of the house where the office is, there's another house on that corner. And I'm sitting there and I'm working on one of my books, and all of a sudden I hear this it was like a metal tire screeching, but in a terrible kind of a way. And then I heard this wham, the biggest, loudest bam you've ever heard. And it was one of those noises I've never really heard, so I couldn't quite place it. It was kind of odd. So I go and I look out my window, and right across the street from my window on that other corner house, there's this, it's a smaller house, the one on the corner. An elderly couple lives there, and they have a chained, wire link wraparound fence on their corner lot there. And right behind that house is the main street, the busy street that, you can kind of turn off that street to turn onto our street. Well, some car with two teenagers in it was going way too fast, I guess, down that main street. They took a left onto our street, but as they took the left, they didn't quite make the turn. They hit the curb. And I'm not kidding you, they did a Dukes of Hazzard, and they went flying up into the air, all the way over the fence, landed in the grassy front yard of my neighbors, and slammed right into their tree. And then they knocked the tree over, and the tree fell into the chain link fence that's facing my side of the window across, the street from my office. All I know is and I have pictures of it still. I took all, I mean, let's face it. You don't see this kind of stuff every day. I'm sitting there, I'm taking pictures out the window, I'm putting it on video. Oh my God, I got you guys have to see what I just saw, sending it to my son. And I knew they were okay because the kids that were in the car, they just opened the doors and came right, popped right out. But I look across the street, right, and you see this tree that's knocked over, a big tree, crushed into the chain link fence with the chain link fence was kind of compressed down, and like the front of a car was like sideways attached to the tree that was falling over. And I'm just like, what the hell? And the next day it was on the news. Someone else had already been out there and saw the car flying in the air and doing a Dukes of Hazzard and it was on the news. And I didn't see that part, but I know that's what happened. And I just saw the end result. But I mean, it distracted me for like an hour. Like I'm not kidding you. It was so funny. Like I was watching through the window. There must have been 10 cop cars came from that call because the people that live there called the cops, of course, or the 911. And I was watching each cop car as they came up, and you just watch their faces. As soon as they saw where the car was and what had happened and how it must have hopped the fence, they just started laughing. They were all laughing like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. But my point is I'm making here is we are naturally drawn to drama. Just like we like R-rated movies, just like we like suspense TV shows, just like we like streaming Netflix, shows that have lots of series and keep us on the edge of our seat, keep us feeling a little bit of what we don't get to feel in our own lives. It's sort of the intrigue. So when it comes to writing, you want to kind of see how far you can take your characters down the pit of despair before readers start rolling their eyes wondering, oh God, what else could go wrong now? So a talented writer knows that conflict induced misery is what keeps readers drooling for more. It's the misery that ignites the conflict and keeps readers turning the page. Suffering is part of human existence. It can be emotional, psychological, mental, physical, financial. Readers can relate to suffering because nobody makes it off this planet without somehow suffering. Suffering should be demonstrated in your writing with an intensity that kind of gnaws at the reader's insides. So, suffering could be a toothache. It could be childhood trauma. It could be our husband leaving us. It could be identity theft, someone wiping out your bank account. It could be death. It could be terminal disease. It could be being a victim of a crime. There's so many kinds of types of suffering you can think of to induce into your character's backstory and current story to drive your plot. And that's what I'm getting at here. So you want to churn your reader's emotions. And to do that, you have to churn the emotions of the characters. So if you think of Stephen King's movie Jaws, this blockbuster movie sort of repaints its reputation as one of the most suspenseful movies still to this day. And you know what's funny about Jaws? I didn't even see Jaws for the first time until I was almost 40. I mean, I don't know how I missed that boat, but I wasn't allowed to watch it as a kid, and then I just wasn't interested after that. So to me, I'm talking about Jaws because I only saw it a few years ago. But when Richard Dreyfuss was dumb enough to lock himself in that cage and plunge into the ocean as shark bait, viewers like me clamped to the edge of the armrest, waiting to see what would happen, holding our breaths, right? When that sort of crass Scottish ringleader guy was gobbled alive and the boat chewed and banged and bumped and tilted, things just kept getting worse and worse. All of their circumstances declined, keeping you short of breath and hanging on the edge of your seat in anticipation, almost breaking out in a sweat, hoping your characters are going to triumph over the evil that's out to get them, or the antagonist that's out to get them. In this case, the antagonist was a shark. Here's another way to look at it. If your book could morph into a movie, what would when would the music surge and lurch and boom to force everyone in the theater to a reaction? You notice when you're watching a movie, the music tends to change right at a suspenseful time, right when a bomb's about to be dropped, literally and metaphorically, right when the bad guy's going to jump out, right when bad news is dropped, right when the music pushes along the story, right? Well, you don't have that in your book. So you have to use your writing skills, your techniques, texture, sight, sound, descriptions of taste, and language to give the same effect. But you can heighten the misery happening with your characters in order to produce this effect. So viewers will pay more attention to action moments of emotional distress more than any other part of a book or a movie. Okay, so as a writer, your job is to entice your readers to give their attention in the same way, right? So miserable circumstances by way of conflict gives you as the writer lots of material to keep building tension through the story. When there's misery, there is tension. The misery has to be overcome by your characters throughout the book. This is part of their A or B story. And it's what they're working toward. It's what they're evolving to and from. So you can call it conflict if you liked, but I like to go a little bit further and say you need misery to create the conflict. When you're really unhappy in your marriage, in your relationship, there's going to be a lot of conflict, right? When you're miserable, not knowing where your son vanished to a month ago as he ran away from home, there's going to be conflict with authorities, with your spouse, with whoever you're putting blame on. When you're physically miserable, there's going to be conflict in your life, not be able to go to work, telling people in your family you can't do as much responsibility as you did before, and them fighting back, on and on and on. So misery induces conflict. You can call this anything you like. I call it misery because everybody knows what misery means. So let's look at this in another way. Your readers will enjoy watching your characters work their way out of their misery. That's what they're paying for when they buy a book, okay? So writers should spend time sort of visualizing their manuscripts like it was a movie. Scenes should play in your imagination until characters, settings, sights, smells, and sounds become astonishing and real. If each chapter or scene in a movie was to induce this effect, it should be exciting, engaging, nail-biting, instead of something that makes your readers or viewers nod off and not want to either close the book or turn off the movie, right? So we're looking to keep readers hooked, just like you want to keep viewers of a movie hooked to finish the movie where they don't even want to take a bathroom break. That's what we're working toward. So misery keeps the readers hooked. It makes them care about your characters as they plug along through the book with hope of their odds being beaten. So the bottom line is that misery sells. Misery sells. It's the state of your character's absolute suffering on a deep level. Suffering ignites empathy and sympathy in your reader, which are both successful components of an industry standard, published and sought after novel. So, we all like happy endings. We all want to see good parts. I'm not saying your book should be misery and suffering from beginning to end, but it should have a balance of the misery, the suffering to induce conflict, as there are small wins along the way before you get to the big, more happy ending win, of course. So a story isn't really a story without some kind of misery, without a problem to solve, without suffering. There are no obstacles to overcome, right? Characters that are driven by their misery will have the most profound impact on readers. The greater the misery, the more impressive the struggle and the accomplishment when the character overcomes it. So a skilled writer will devise, harsh scenarios or backstories or plot lines that can happen to characters. And just when those things happen, they know how to just jam a few more screws. Just like, what else could we do? Just when we think this character's like getting over it, now we can just jam another screwdriver in the side of her head and just 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, until eventually you see your character finally almost about to achieve something or win or accomplish something, and then get right to the edge, and then something just stops them right at that point, and you're like, no, that kind of a thing. And just the same, right? Your readers want to be able to be the cheerleader standing on the sideline with their pom-poms rooting for your characters. They want to be able to encourage their characters, and they also like that sort of chilling aspect of an anticipation, like wondering if your character is going to succeed or not in overcoming an obstacle. So when we think about what misery is exactly, of course, I could give you a literary pun and say, ask Stephen King, for, Misery of the novel, in case you're not a horror fan. But anyway, misery implies an experience of ill-being due to misfortune, affliction, or intense unhappiness. Writers need to have a conflict to induce the suffering. Your protagonists are meant to be heroes and heroines, yet they're not meant to be perfect. In order to create conflict, you need to give your protagonist, first of all, a gallant ideal, an admirable goal, a wretched grief, a painful yearning, a dreaded fear, a heartfelt wish, or a burning need for something they just can't quite yet get. You then make it nearly impossible for your character to either get or achieve or avoid whatever this thing is. In fact, to create this misery, you need to do the opposite of what the character wants and make it hard and challenging for your character to obtain that thing. So, if the true definition of misery is the state of unhappiness, then you can use misery to your advantage to create conflict. Misery and conflict are like lovers, right? Strolling hand in hand as they entwine in a symbiotic dance to create a perfect picture. Misery creates emotional, physical, and mental conflict, and conflict creates wretched unhappiness, suffering, and stress. You can't really have one without the other. So you have to be prepared, depending on your genre, to be a little bit gruff, a little bit graphic, a little bit foul, a little bit mean, a little bit intense, a little bit dramatic, depending on your genre, a little bit sadistic, and a little bit risky, pushing the boundaries of how far to stretch the misery that your characters endure. And this misery can come in different ways. So a character can have an internal misery through emotional battles, being madly in love with somebody that is married to somebody else, and this person is maybe a good friend of yours, and you're suffering internally. Your character is suffering internally because she can't, she's just miserable. She just can't, she doesn't want to be a homewrecker. She doesn't think this man feels the same way about her, whatever. And, you can make your character have an internal emotional struggle that is really, really intense. It could be guilt for a bad deed. It could be grief, could be recovering from trauma. And you can show this through inner dialogue, through mental struggles, through character conversations, or even outwardly through actions that function as a result of an emotional battle, right? Misery can be created through showing grief when processing loss, even. It can be igniting a teasing of what could be, but make it just where the character can't quite have it. It could be around a bad luck. It could be a string of impossible standards or a loss of hope. But how much misery is too much? How much misery is too much? And how do you know when you've gone further than your readers can handle? This is a good question. Treating your characters with compassion and kindness doesn't always equal the kind of fantastic drama that sells. So, if every major blockbuster movie on the market was a hunky-dory cupcake and carnival fantasy, Barbie, Pony, Care Bear, Happy Land, then people would be reading more books than they would be making and buying and watching movies. When we think about hard topics, kidnapping, rape, murder, abuse, torture, theft, arson, burglary, homicide, death, loss of love, emotional suffering, physical suffering. This is what we see in the movies, right? This is what we see in really intense series selling fiction novels. And add to this the quality of lots of action and really the trick to selling this addicting drama is to put your characters into situations where the worst that can happen does happen. Turn your suspense novel into a hack lab. Experiment with all the bad things that could go wrong and see what happens. When you least want to write something bad happening to a character, all the better time to do it. Push your boundaries a little bit. When you're tempted to give them a break, cut some slack and ease up on their struggles. Then toss in a few more rounds of bad luck or face punching or whatever it is. There's no such thing as too much misery if you write suspense, horror, and crime fiction. If you write romantic fiction, misery would be internal or emotional through longing or unmet, unrequited desires. The more miserable the circumstance and the suffering, the more impressive the hero or heroine of your book will look when that misery is overcome. So, if your characters receive what they wanted or needed easy and too early in the book, you wouldn't have a story, right? So, if you've given your readers a reason to care about your characters early in the book, then your readers will suffer when your character suffers. And if not, then you're not doing a very good job at tugging at your readers' heartstrings and getting them invested in your characters. Now, you don't want to stuff your characters in a rattlesnake snack sack with boiling water and then end the book, right? I mean, you have to give some satisfaction. You have to overcome the odds. You want to think, and I'll give you some strategies on how you can do this in just a minute here. So let's see, for an example, what if your character goes through a traumatic divorce and then found happiness again? Great, nobody cares. And I mean, we assume that's going to happen. We hope that's going to happen. That does happen for most people. That might be a little bit boring. But if that same character is madly in love with a man who not only cheated on her, but also turned out to be a psycho killer that had, three other women he'd been married to that he murdered, that are now buried under the house he's living with his current wife. Now we have some interesting story. We have some real suffering going on. So in the end, when this woman busts out of her marital prison to get revenge on her maniacal husband, and she kind of pulls a Con the Conner move of brilliance and gets her vengeance by bringing him to justice, she had a lot of suffering, but but the story was engaging and addicting and brilliant, and she becomes this heroine in the end. So I like to look at it, the greater the misery, the greater the victory. So don't feel guilty for making your characters suffer. It's hard, sure, because we love our characters like they're people that we know and that people that are dear to our heart. But on every page, every day when you write, remember their suffering. Don't forget to bring mental, emotional, physical, and intellectual gloom into your stories, interwoven through the character struggles to enrich their evolving as human beings as they overcome their obstacles and work toward what they want to achieve. So you won't have a job as a fiction author if you go too easy on your characters. Nobody wants to read that. That's boring. There might be some versions of very, very blasé Christian fiction where, even then, though, I guarantee you there is some conflict, even in a PG rated book or even a religious based PG rated book. There will be conflict, mild hints toward suffering, probably more emotional or estranged relationships, that kind of thing. But remember, we don't want to bore our characters, okay? So keep flinging obstacles in your characters' paths. Keep the book interesting. So let's talk about how you can come up with some types of suffering or misery that can produce conflict to keep your story progressing along. So I'm going to give you a set of questions. You can write them down, pause, write them down, pause. Write down these questions and then think about your own characters and answer them and use accordingly, okay? And here's some examples. How to create misery in your story to make it interesting and induce conflict. Who does your character love the most? Kill or maim that person or withhold that person from them. Boom. Suffering, conflict. What item does your character value more than anything? Destroy that thing. Have it be stolen, make it be lost. What does your character long for or daydream about more than anything else? Make it impossible for your character to get or achieve that thing, no matter how hard they try. They just can't quite get it. What is your character's one main resource for money and survival? Whatever it is, flush that thing. have it be gone, stolen, washed away to where now they're really struggling. What is the character's most horrid fear? Make that fear show up in the worst possible way. Where's the place your character needs to go above all else? Cut off the possibility of him trying to get there. What is the one object that your character attaches symbolic meaning to? Have someone minimize its significance in mockery. Have him find out it didn't mean what he thought it meant, it was all a ruse or a lie, or have it taken away. What is your character's aching regret from the past? What is the thing your character has the most guilt from in the past? Make that thing happen to them again to reinstill that wound. Now they have to overcome it. Give your character a hero or role model who turns out to be the opposite of everything he thought that person was and destroys everything your person believed in, your character believed in. Or allow your characters to believe they've solved their problem. And then when they're not looking, or right when they've solved it or just about solved it, throw in a bunch of obstacles. When all else fails, make a list, a random brainstorm, free writing list of ghastly things that could happen to your characters. Then pick one and work it into your story. So as you can see, there are plenty of ways to induce suffering or misery, to push the conflict super easily. Conflict is the easiest thing to create. It will always be something your character feels internally. You can have conflict between characters. You can have conflict with your character and the environment. You can have internal conflict, guilt, regret, shame, trauma. You can have physical conflict. You can have a conflict of ideas or perspectives. Any of the ideas I just gave you, all of these things not only make your character suffer, it pushes them toward the actions that keeps the tension, that keeps the conflict, that keeps your story going. Okay, everybody, please let me know if this helped you in any way. And if you'd like to see or have more lectures on topics related to crafting your fiction novels, let me know some ideas and I will come up with something that helps.